This
Um,
conference will now be recorded.
so in the small MS4 permit, many of you are familiar with the fact that we have a stormwater management program that is required, and it focuses on 6 different areas, the implementation of best management practices in those 6 different areas. When we call them the 6 minimum control measures, there's public education, there's public involvement, illicit discharges, construction site runoff, and post-construction stormwater management. This one really focuses on what we're talking today, on the pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. And the overall objective of this minimum control measure, or MCM, is that you shall develop and implement an operation and maintenance program that includes a training component and has the ultimate goal of preventing or reducing pollutant runoff from municipal operations. So basically, over the course of providing the services that we as municipalities do, as public entities provide for the public, how we do that, when we do it in a manner to reduce the amount of pollutants that are generated. And within this minimum control measure, we now have a new performance standard that is about ditch maintenance. And what the permit says is, for all areas of soil disturbance associated with ditch or MS4 maintenance caused by the small MS4, soil stabilization shall be initiated in accordance with the timeframes specified in the table. And that table basically mimics the stabilization requirements that we find in the construction general permit. So if you're doing a construction project as an MS4 and you're disturbing an acre or more, you would have coverage under Ohio EPA's Npds construction general permit. And you would be required, if the site reaches final grade or if the site is going to be disturbed but a portion of it's inactive for a period of time, to implement some type of temporary or permanent soil stabilization. We want to keep the dirt on the site and out of our waterways, for water quality purposes, as well as the other social economic benefits that can be obtained from that. But if you're not a large construction activity, if you're not that 1 acre or more of earth disturbance, there's still a lot of impact that can be had from our day-to-day activities in doing maintenance on our drainage systems. So that is the focus of this performance standard. For those sites that are less than 1 acre of earth disturbance, but we still have an earth disturbance, and we have this opportunity to intervene and implement some best management practices. So that is what the permit language says. I want to highlight a few items on this. So what is the MS4? Because it's when we're doing maintenance, that's when this performance standard kicks in. It's a conveyance. It's owned and operated by a public entity. It's designed and used for conveying solely stormwater. It's not the combined sewer system, and it's not something that goes to a publicly owned treatment works. So I think it's important when people see this performance standard to help them visualize where this performance standard is applicable. So this is only about when we're doing maintenance on the MS4. There is the condition that when we're doing this maintenance, again, once you hit final grade, that some kind of soil cover is put into place within 7 days of reaching final grade. If this is going to be an area that's going to be disturbed but remain inactive for over 14 days, some kind of cover gets put on that soil within the first 7 of those 14 days. But there's an exception. There's a priority, there's a higher risk when we have soil disturbance close to a surface water of the state. So this performance standard asks that in those situations that a method is applied to the soil, some kind of cover within the first 2 days instead of 7 days. And just to keep that in mind, what is the surface water of the state? Where is that time frame drop to 2 days? That's when you're near a stream, a lake, ponds, marshes, wetlands. But again, we're not talking about sewage systems. We're not talking about, did we put in a wastewater lagoon? nope, that's not, that's not a surface water of the state, so we don't have to worry about that. And so what would be soil stabilization? What would we actually be doing and putting into place? Basically, it's anything that puts cover over the disturbed ground to provide erosion control. So it can be vegetation, it can be straw mulch, it could be wood mulch, matting, geotextiles, stone. All of these are options. And which option you would select is going to depend on a couple different things. Anything from soil type to the amount of slope that's present. If you have a steep slope, you're going to probably want to put matting down and not just put grass seed with a mulch over it. Again, if you're placing it on a bank that has fluctuating water levels, then you're going to be subject to some shear stress, and you're going to need to consider, again, seed with mulch might not hold. We might need to step it up to matting or maybe put stone in its place. Timing is important. If you are finishing a project in July, you're not watering it. So what would be the best approach in that scenario? It might be a form of temporary stabilization until the season is more conducive to vegetation, if that's what your end goal is a form of vegetation. But of course, if you choose to put a riprap down, that can work any time of year. But if you want more information about how do we implement these different types of soil stabilization measures, when are they the best practice? What's the specifications for doing that? We do have guidance in Ohio EPA's Rainwater and Land Development Manual. You can find that on the web page. Of course, feel free to give us a call, and we will also help you with any questions you might have in this area. And then the next important thing to know as we're considering this new performance standard is, when do I actually have to meet this? You have 2 years. We took into consideration that there are projects that have been bid. This was not a consideration in a budget or in the bid documents. So we wanted to make sure that we gave MS4s ample time to investigate these methods and set up their internal processes to accommodate this. So this stabilization of like the ditches when we're doing ditch work, that comes into play April 1st, 2023 for those MS4s who are renewing coverage, which should be everybody in this group. Another thing that I'd like to point out is this standard is only applicable within your regulated MS4. So that's the boundary where you need to meet this. We would encourage people to implement this standard wherever they have an opportunity to do so. But as far as a permit requirement, only with inside the regulated MS4. And that boundary can be different than what your jurisdictional boundary is. So that being said, I'm going to open this up for questions. And again, this is a map of our districts, and in our district, Northwest Ohio, Stefan and I are always happy to take your questions and help you in any way that we can. Okay. I'm looking in the chat. I don't see any questions there.
Either.
Lynette, I am not seeing any questions in the chat. Are there any questions that anyone would like to pose to Lynette?
Hi, Lynette. This is Lauren Rush.
Hey, Lauren.
I wanted to ask the question, is the intent of this mostly for ditch and stream projects, or is this reaching out towards piped portions of the storm water system projects as well?
I talked to Jason right before this to verify. Our intent was to make it a requirement for like your open ditches and your swales. We do encourage, and under your P2 for municipal operations, there should be a plan in place to stabilize things. But as far as this time frame, what central office is telling me is the intention is really those open channel conveyances.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Lynette, this is Christina Kukli. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Christina?
I'm good. Long time no see. Um,
Yeah.
But question I have for you. So it sounds like EPA is largely implementing this regime through the MS4 program, through your section of code there. And I know the petition ditch law recently changed. And sorry if it's a little bit beyond the scope, but I just don't know if you happen to know how the requirements for MS4s in maintaining open conveyances compare to open conveyances outside MS4s.
Okay. I am not familiar with the new changes to the petition ditch law. I will say that up front.
Okay.
What I can do is speak in terms of how EPA and our stormwater regulations and our stormwater permits. So if we're talking ditch maintenance and you are outside of the regulated MS4, what will come into play is whether or not you are required to have the Npds permit coverage for construction activities. And the threshold is normally 1 acre of earth disturbance. But when we talk about maintenance of ditches, as long as all the earth disturbance that is being done is to maintain the original line and grade, it's routine maintenance. And then the threshold then for determining whether you need Npds permit coverage becomes 5 acres. So if you're going out, you're doing like a single dip on a ditch, you know, you can disturb up to 5 acres and not need an Npds permit. If you decide to widen it, deepen it, realign it, now that's new construction, and the threshold we're dealing with to determine whether you need permit coverage is 1 acre. And if that's the case, you get construction general permit coverage, and all the terms and conditions of that permit come into play. So that table of temporary and permanent stabilization comes into play. So if you're routine maintenance and over 5 acres, you need the CGP. If you are doing new construction because we're realigning or we're widening, you need the CGP if you're disturbing 1 acre. And once you're in the CGP, what it's going to say is if you're at final grade, you have 7 days to stabilize it. Unless you're within 50 feet of a surface water, then you have 2 days to initiate stabilization. If you have disturbed an area and it's going to sit there bare and not work for more than 14 days, you have 7 days within that 14-day window to get some kind of cover on the soil. But again, if you're within 50 feet of a surface water of the state, you have 2 days to get some kind of temporary erosion control on that soil. So that's how we interface with ditch maintenance that occurs outside of the regulated MS4.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Lynette, we've got a couple of questions in the chat box that I'll read off.
Okay.
This is from Robert Denzik. Would the open conveyances mean purposely formed elements only such as ditches, or would a natural river or creek or shorelines also be included?
That is a good question. And that's going to be something that I would recommend talking with your district stormwater staff about specifically, because I think this ties into the question of when is a ditch and when is it a waters of the state, and or when is it an MS4, when is it a waters of the state, and sometimes it can be both. So I would take the specific situation if you have that question and run it past the district staff, and we can help work you through that scenario.
Okay, thanks, Lynette. And then a question from Mike Moulton. Are commercial developers responsible for acquiring their own permits?
Are commercial developers required of obtaining their own permits? Yes. So if we have a commercial development, say we have a subdivision, they're going to create a ditch, they're going to realign a ditch, then they are obligated to get their NPDS permit coverage if they're going to hit that earth disturbance of 1 acre or more. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat box.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity. And again, you all know where to find Stefan and I. And like I said, we're more than happy to help work through any questions that you might have.
Yeah, thanks, Lynette. That was a lot of good information. I think if we don't have any other questions, we can move on to our next presentation, which is slope stabilization with natives. And Alex Duncan with A&J Landscape is going to present that information to us. Alex Duncan is a landscape and environmental consultant living and working in Northwest Ohio. Mr. Duncan is a graduate from the University of Toledo, where he obtained a master's degree in biology with a focus on plant physiology and restoration ecology. His specific areas of interest are riparian and wetland restoration, invasive species monitoring and control, green stormwater construction and maintenance, organic lawn care, and native landscaping and permaculture design. Alex wears many hats and is currently a project manager for A&J Landscaping, wetlands biologist for Castle Hill Environmental, and is the owner and operator for New Roots Environmental. In his spare time, he likes to garden and take bike rides with his wife and 2 children. All right, thanks so much, Alex.
All right, that was a great introduction. Thanks for that. Can everybody hear me, see my screen? Are we good to go?
Yes, I can hear you and see it.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So yeah, as the title of my talk suggests, I'm going to be talking about doing slope stabilization with a specific focus on native plants and their kind of benefits in that area. This is a picture of a young version of me staring off into the distance into a urban stream. This is back down in the city of Austin, where I worked kind of out of grad school for a couple years, kind of pondering, what are we going to do? How are we going to restore this site? Obviously, it's highly urbanized, a lot of erosion going on. So I work for the Watershed Protection Department down there. And what was interesting is when I came on board, I worked with the surface water team. Our main focus was doing water quality sampling, and we did some sort of riparian restoration work and some wetland stuff. But there was another group that we work with that was mainly brought in, made up of engineers, landscape architects, and they focused on doing the kind of hardscape stream restoration work, the ripraps, the gabions, the capital improvement projects, when we were doing culvert work and things like that. And we were extremely separated when I first started working there. And then as the kind of years went on, we started, having meetings together and discussing different, ways we could partner and team up together. And kind of before I left, we had a really good partnership where the engineers and the biologists were working pretty hand in hand with these restoration projects. And we were incorporating native plants and ecological solutions along with the engineering kind of structures and other elements that needed to go on. So that's kind of my background, kind of where I came from there. And I've kind of continued on doing stream and riparian restoration work now in Ohio. So briefly go over a few definitions just so we're all on the same page of what I'm talking about. Title of my talk is stream stability. So the opposite of stability would be instability. So that would be erosion. And that basically just means active soil loss resulting from wind and water. And when I'm talking about streams, we're usually talking about water flowing through there and causing loose soil and erosion. I'm going to use the word riparian quite a bit. That just basically means the area of land adjacent to a stream. I'll show you a graphic on that in a second. And then I'm probably going to talk a lot about kind of wetland and upland. And I'll keep it very simple. Wetland essentially just means a wetter land area that supports a unique plant and animal community. And then conversely, an upland area generally drier, and that also supports a certain kind of plant animal community, and those are somewhat separate. So here's a quick little graphic of what I mean by riparian zone. Here's your typical stream here on the left, and then you have your bank. Sometimes it's steeper, sometimes it's flatter, and these areas kind of right along the stream tend to be wetter areas. And then as you get up top of the bank, at some point it kind of transitions to an upland environment. Generally, riparian zone is where you have kind of a surface and groundwater connection going on, and once that kind of goes away, you're kind of out of the riparian zone. And down here in the bottom, I just kind of want to illustrate that, a healthy riparian zone equals ecological function. So we're kind of focusing here today on stabilization, but, we're talking water quality, flood control, habitat, filtering out pollutants, a lot of things. But generally stabilization, you're talking about, again, that 50-foot kind of from the stream is pretty crucial when we're dealing with that. So when you have erosion, in a stream channel, you're looking at loss of ecological function, right? You're not holding onto the soil, you're not filtering out pollutants, you're not providing habitat for plants and animals. And this is both a rural and urban issue. Generally, there's two main kind of factors that lead to heavy erosion, and that's either the first one is removing that vegetation that's growing on the top of the bank. If you're mowing or doing ag all the way up to the edge of the bank, there's not much vegetation, not much roots. You're going to get erosion that way. And the other way is to increase the flow of water kind of moving through that system. So if you have a stream channel like here on the right in an urban environment, more impervious surface, more runoff kind of flowing through there, you'll get erosion that way as well. So it's usually a combination of things going on there. So as we just heard from the previous talk, the current standards are that stabilization is required, either temporary or permanent. Within 50 feet of state waters. And as you saw, the methods are varied, but generally, seeding, mulching, matting, sodding, buffered strips, phasing constructions, and other techniques are used in that sense. What I see generally is seeding is usually, and kind of matting, erosion control blankets are your two most common stabilization methods used. So here is the spec for temporary seeding that is most commonly used. As you can see, it consists of oats, which is kind of your annual cover crop. You got some annual ryegrass as well, but this predominantly consists of cool season turf grasses. You got fescue, ryegrass, and bluegrass in there, and those are your most common grasses you see in stabilization seeding. This is the spec for permanent seeding, which is very similar to the temporary one, highly dependent upon the cool season turf grasses, your fescue, bluegrasses, and rye's. So again, to reiterate, so slope stabilization seeding, turf grasses are generally the most common used. The reason generally is because they're cheap, readily available, and relatively quick growing overall. But some negatives with turf grasses is they have shallow roots. They're generally upland, which means they like to grow in more drier conditions. So if you're trying to do stabilization close to a stream in a wetter area, they're aren't going to really be happy there. And then if you have a slope or a riparian area with just turf grass, it generally has low functional value for habitat and water filtration and water quality, things like that. So this graphic here I love because it shows all the way over here on the left. This is your typical lawn turf grass. I do a lot of soil cores and dig in turf grass areas, and you're lucky to get 4 to 6 inches of root growth in most areas. So you get about 6 inches of top growth, on a mowed lawn, but even if you let it go, you're looking only about maybe 6 inches of root growth. And now if you compare that to other native perennials and grasses, as you can see, the root growth, the depth, and the density of the root growth is a lot more. You go from 6 inches with the turf grass down to 8, 9, 10, and greater depth of rooting from some of these natives. So it's hard to see in the bottom, but there's a lot of good stuff here. Coreopsis, coneflower, goldenrod, blue stem, switchgrasses, a lot of native stuff, a lot of things that are widely available too. So So again, what I'm reiterating with that last slide is that, plant roots equal stabilization when you're talking about vegetation cover. So a densely and deep rooted plants will provide more stream stabilization and associated ecological functions more so than if you have shallow rooted plants, which probably sounds pretty obvious. So you're going to get that erosion control, you're going to get that nutrient cycling, you're going to get that water infiltration, and then you can help hold in soil moisture, and there's a lot of other benefits that goes along with that. Another great photo here on the right. This is switchgrass, just showing you the dense, deep root mass that goes along with this native grass. There was some research done a while back with the Arizona State University. They specifically looked at riparian and wetland, so those plants that grow in those wetter areas and along the banks of streams, to look at their traits for stream stabilization. So again, most of these really aren't available in our area, but the point is here that these wetland plants grew about 3 to 5 times the amount of root biomass when compared to this above ground biomass. So again, they have, whatever you see above ground, they're growing, 3 to 5 times that amount below ground, which is going to provide more stabilization. And some of those riparian grasses could provide as much as 30 tons of root mass per acre, which again, it's hard to fathom. It just sounds like a lot. It's 30 tons is a big number. So back to if you're choosing stabilization grasses, if your choices are turf grass, which is an upland grass, they typically provide, they grow about as much below ground roots as they do above ground leaf mass. So they're about a 1-to-1 ratio. Whereas again, these riparian and native grasses like little bluestem and switchgrass produce, 3 or 5 times or even more root volume than top grows. So when choosing grasses, you want to pick obviously the more native, densely rooting ones. So again, when you're choosing to pick plants, what plants do you choose? There's this great publication that was done by the Nueces River Authority. This is probably came out in early 2010, somewhere in there. This is obviously down in Texas where I was working. With the help from Steve Nelly from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they published this and helped introduce the concept of stability ratings when it comes to choosing native plants. So they developed a stability rating that showed various native plants and their ability to withstand erosive forces in a stream and riparian area. So they developed a scale. So if you can imagine, a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is equivalent to bare ground. As you can imagine, bare ground, exposed soil, that's easily eroded, easily washed away. So that's providing almost no stability whatsoever. Whereas 10 on the scale would be equivalent to anchored rock, bedrock, large boulders, or maybe some large, anchored wall stone or something like that. Essentially, concrete that's not moving anywhere. And they kind of came to the conclusion, or came to the average, that about a stability rating of about a 6 to 7 is considered the minimum necessary for adequate bank stability. So, and they also in this publication listed the stability rating of individual plants, and they go on to talk about how a more diverse, interconnected, grouping of plants is going to provide the most stability. So I'm going to go through some common plants in our area and show their stability rating. Switchgrass, this is probably my favorite native grass species. I use this in stream restorations. I use this in landscape plantings. I'm all over the place. It has a stability rating of 9. So this is almost as strong as concrete or bedrock in slowing, the flow of water down and protecting that soil from being washed away. It's a facultative plant, which means it grows, kind of in slightly wet, but also kind of slightly dry conditions. Bulrushes, we have a variety of species in our area. These are also great at controlling erosion. They have a stability rating of 9. These grow in wetter environments normally. Cattail, which we see everywhere. Again, this is not something you're going to plant on a slope per se, but they do provide great stability in the right environment. Spike rushes, different Heliocris species. These ones have a stability rating of 6, and we got a lot of these commonly growing along our streams in this area. Other rushes, Juncus species too. These are great. 6 on stability ranking. Cutgrass, another native grass, is a 6. Giant goldenrod, I'm getting into some perennials now, is got a stability rating of 7. This grows great along banks and steep slopes, does really well, has deep roots. Buttonbush, this is a native shrub found growing in wetland and riparian areas. It likes wetter conditions, but has a stability rating of 7. It's a good plant to choose. All kinds of willows do really well, and their average stability rating is around 7. Sycamore, now we're getting some trees here, stability rating of 7, commonly found growing along larger stream channels. Shrubs, dogwood, this is one of my favorite landscape plants, riparian wetland plants is great, very diverse, and you can use this in a lot of different locations. So again, main point I'm trying to get across is that, diversity of riparian plants is optimal. So as this graphic down here shows, like in a perfect scenario, if you can have, multiple stratas, ground cover, if you can have understory, which would be, your dogwoods and your small saplings and trees, and your canopy trees like your sycamores and your maples and things, this would be an ideal diverse setting to where you're going to have the best stream and slope stabilization. But oftentimes we're not planting trees in these areas and we're just choosing one method. So if we're doing maybe just seeding or some planting and you had to choose one strata, I would say focus on those native grasses and some of those perennials. So that's going to be, the best bang for your buck, and it's probably going to provide the best and most stabilization the quickest. So here's a list of my top 5 stabilizing grasses that I've had success using in and around our area. My number 1 favorite, switchgrass, is on top. Virginia wild rye, blue joint grass, rice cutgrass, and prairie cordgrass. These are pretty widely available in some native plant nurseries, and these do well. You can get them in plugs, or they're often in seed mixes as well. So these are a great sort of plant you want to try to get in your seed mixes, your stabilization seed mixes if available. So now that we know, native plants are the best, I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects I've been working on. This is the Ottawa River. We've been working on in conjunction with the Village of Ottawa Hills and the Nature Conservancy. We've done a variety of methods here. We had some invasive species control work we had to do first to get some Phragmites and reed canary grass under control. And then we did a bare root planting event early this spring. We actually had a bunch of volunteers out to do that. That was a great event. I think it was about 1,000 plants in the ground. These are all trees and shrubs. And then later on, A&J came back out and planted about 1,000 native grass plugs. This was predominantly along the slopes and other open, more eroded areas. And then we're also going to do some seeding throughout the whole site here later on this year. So it's a great project that focused predominantly on planting, but it used a variety of different methods. Here's a quick map to show you the location. This is on Central Avenue, directly downstream of Wildwood Metro Park. It's a 15-acre site along the Ottawa River. And this map just kind of shows the diversity of things we did, from bare root planting to seeding and invasive species control and other stuff. So it's a great project. It's ongoing. I think it captures, how using native plants can really help out in these cases. This is a project I worked on. This is in Austin, on Lake Austin, which is in downtown. We had to use coconut cores along the banks of the shoreline because there's such wave and other erosive forces along the bank. You couldn't really get plants to stay otherwise. So we installed these coconut cores along the edge, allowed us to plant our plug grasses in the middle. And then photos 4 years later showed these areas, took really well. Those plants not only established, they started to escape and move, outside of that original coconut core planting. So sometimes you need to use a variety of options to get a successful planting. This is another project. It was a conceptual project when I was down there. I'm pretty sure construction happened a couple years ago. This just shows that sometimes, when you have extreme sort of erosion along streams, there's no soil left. You might have to use a combination of engineering structures, installation of a ready rock or a gabion wall or something along there. You might have to backfill it with soil, but you're still going to want to focus on using your native grasses, your native plants, in the planting area to make sure you maximize your, erosion control and stability there. So this is a project that was a collaboration between, kind of biologists and the engineers to make sure we use the best of both worlds. This project here is along the Maumee River that we did. It was a simple kind of erosion control project, but I just want to show that we used a combination. We built a wall. This is the design. This is the actual work when we were done. So we built a small wall here to help control erosion up top. And then we focused on planted natives. This is our switchgrasses. We got black-eyed Susans and coneflowers here kind of throughout. And we use these plants to control erosion. They were having some issues there along the shore. This is another one from Austin I was involved with. A photo on the left here, I think it's from 1997. This just shows a stream channel that was had a lot of erosion, undercut banks. It was mowed right up to the edge of the stream channel. So we actually did a variety of adaptive restoration approaches here. Step one is we just removed the mowing and the disturbance, so we allowed plants to kind of grow in naturally. And then after that happened, we started to do some invasive species control work. And then finally, we did some native plug planting, some bare root planting, and some seeding. And this is a photo a couple years ago just showing that plants did get established. Willows came in. The erosion was a lot less, and this stream was starting to stabilize. So sometimes you got to be adaptive, kind of allow the stream to do its thing, and see where it goes. This is a situation. So if you have a location where you don't want to do native grasses, or you want it to be kind of a more low growing situation, have that look of a turf grass, I'd recommend doing a Nomo fescue mix. This is along the Ottawa River, and we use erosion control blankets and Nomo fescue seeding after we did some invasive species work in there to make sure there was no invasives growing. So this stuff is slightly deeper rooted than your traditional turf grasses, doesn't require mowing and maintenance, doesn't require fertilizer, and these work well on drier, kind of steeper slope areas. And lastly, this is another project from Austin that I worked on. This just shows the power of passive restoration, essentially, when you're just leaving things alone. Streams have the amazing ability to kind of come back from disturbances, and plants will grow, whether it's the right ones or not. You can get plants to just grow back in. So you can see after year one here in the middle, and then, 5 to 10 years later, we had a pretty good, plants growing in, woody species and grasses and stuff growing in. So that's all I got. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Hi, this is Sarah Helbig. I have been looking at some options for a lake area that we're familiar with, and learned recently about how much the land, the banks around the lake really, the shorelines really can engage in water quality as well as erosion. And I was just curious, when you were going through some of those different species, if any of them are better than others in terms of being able to filter outside waters that come into the lakes as well, from your knowledge, or if that might be in that book that you had shared.
There's a lot of information out there. I mean, as far as individual species and their ability to filter out specific nutrients, I mean, you can get some of that data, but overall, I think your best option is just to focus on doing a diversity of plant species, and especially ones that have those deep roots, because the more roots you have, the more growth and nutrient uptake you're going to get, and they can also filter out sediment that's moving through that is going to help filter out those pollutants and nutrients. So I don't have a specific answer to that, but I'd say a diverse, a native grouping of plants will be best.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, this is Lynette. Does the book speak to, with those erosion control values, how long does it take to establish that kind of effectiveness? And in the meantime, do you have some insight as to what people can do to kind of bolster that erosion control capacity until the root structure can take over?
Yeah, so I think similar to what you said, it kind of depends on the specific site, how steep the slopes are, how much water's moving through that system. But generally, the seed blends that have those natives in there, I mean, it's going to take some time. It could take upwards of a year or more before you really get good growth and establishment from those natives. So you're going to have an annual sort of cover in there. Oats and rye is still going to have to be in the seed blend to give you that quick cover. And then if your site is going to be really steep, you're going to have a lot of water moving through there. Some erosion control blankets might be necessary to hold that seed in place while it gets established. So they're definitely a little more sensitive to get going. But once they do get going, they grow quick and they send those roots down. So that first year is probably the most tenuous. You got to be careful and make sure you don't waste that seed.
Thank you.
We do have a question in the chat box from Lauren Rush with Perrysburg. If looking for a bulk seed mix to use for bank stabilization, what would be the best mix to request that utilizes natives? That's the first part of the question. And what is a general cost comparison between a native bank stabilization seed mix versus a conventional grass seed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll touch on the source. I mean, there's a couple of nearby places. Cardno Native Plant Nursery, they got a lot of really great seed mixes. Ernst Seed Company, they have a lot of great mixes as well. And actually, they get really focused, really specialized, where they got everything from wetland woody mixes to slope specific mix, steep slope mixes to upland meadows. I mean, they got 50, 60 different varieties of seed mixes you can choose from. So there is some variability depending on what you're planting, but they do have kind of general, relatively cheaper seed blends for, just a straight up slope stabilization, or kind of they have some bioswale mixes and things they call it that are pretty general that have most of those native grasses in there. So there are mixes available. I could recommend a couple and send that information out, the ones that I've used and had success with. From a cost comparison, they are more expensive than your regular grass seed. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what, maybe 4 to 5 times more expensive, per pound than a grass seed. I mean, there's some that are pretty close, maybe 2 to 3 times. So there are some options there. So you are talking more cost, but I think it is, it's not that consequential when you're thinking the project as a whole. So.
And I'll also mention that Chris Patterson's with Partners for Clean Streams also has a recommendation that she's happy to share with the group as well. And that was developed by Lucas County, it looks like, for some of the work they were doing.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in, Kari.
Okay.
I mean, not to, name another option, but we worked a bit with Ohio Prairie Nursery with Lucas County and on a couple of different potential blends. I don't think they've actually used them yet. I'm still hopeful, but tailoring it a little bit to, like, say, an ag area mix compared to a residential mix, because sometimes you'll have residential areas where they're like, oh, we'd rather have the flowers and the pollinator, garden look, as opposed to just, hey, we're stabilizing this bank, stabilizing a bank. So worked with some options on that. Also, just the difference between maybe something that's really suitable for clays versus sands, because they do have quite a variety in Lucas County in particular. But yeah, hopeful still to see maybe them start using some of those options, but I think it's going to come down to cost too, that it's up to their contractors after they're going back to stabilize what it is, and then it comes down to either what they're used to, where they buy from, or what the cost is. So yeah, but we developed some recommendation documents with them for them to try and pass on to their contractors to say, here's some recommended post-project work. So I'm very excited to see your presentation, Alex, and see the new pictures from Ottawa Hills too.
Yeah.
Didn't make it out to the planting this spring, so.
Following up on that one, if I could ask, also considering sort of the conditions of the area, are there guidelines or sort of recommendations on if you were in heavily wooded areas, evergreen areas, you're gonna have much more tannic acid in runoff. Near high paved areas, you're going to have possible more salt runoff from winter conditions. Are there guidelines or recommendations along those lines?
As far as what seed blends to use in those like more urban areas and disturbed areas?
Yes.
I haven't really seen that. No, I mean, it would just have to be, there are some species you want to select that are a little more hardier, like back to the residential versus ag seed blends. Some of those flowering perennials and stuff are going to be a little more sensitive than I would say some of those bunch grasses are. So when in doubt, I'd say focus on a blend that has, some of the native bunch grasses. That's going to be probably the hardiest mix. And that'd be what I recommend. But yeah, there's really no specifics on that I'm aware of.
This is Chris real quick too, but I guess, I mean, one other thought that is if you can benchmark off of anywhere else near where you're doing the project, you're going to get a sense of what already can be well established. So, if there's any way to just kind of go, take somebody who knows their plants or knows their, grasses and look along that stretch, that might give you some sense too of sometimes it's harder to establish more sensitive species in an area that's just really not suited. So.
Yeah, and I'll chime in real quick too. It's hard because sometimes when you're doing work on stream slopes and banks, it's like you just kind of assume that, oh, these are wet areas and it's got to be
Yeah.
wetland plants, but oftentimes these are incredibly dry and exposed areas. And you might be looking at prairie seeding might be better along the top of the bank than doing wetland seeding. So just something to consider because I look at the plants around you, look at the soils. So that's a good point.
Are there any other questions? Let's see. I think we answered the ones in the chat. If not, I think we can move on to our next presentation. Thank you so much for all that information, Alex. Those were great visuals and interesting projects and everything.
Okay.
A lot of
Thank
good
you.
information. Yes. Our next presentation is ditch stabilizing products, and Eric Ducerno from Coleman Corporation is going to be presenting. Eric has been with Coleman for 23 years, the majority of which he has worked in outside sales in Coleman's underground product division. Through this role, he has learned about and sold many of the products involved in ditch stabilization. Eric is currently the sales manager of Coleman's underground products team, as well as the general manager of Yard 1 and Yard 4 building materials operation. So thank you, Eric, for being here with us and agreeing to present.
Sure, no problem. No problem. All right, you guys see everything and hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think so.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, I am, as she said, Eric Ducerno, going to be highlighting some of the ditch stabilizing products that we offer here at Coleman Corporation, and maybe give you some ideas on some of the more temporary options as opposed to Alex's long-term benefits. I wanted to touch a little bit on some tile drain repair options. It's important to repair or replace any bad sections of pipe, any bad sections of culvert that might be around. Situations such as a hole in the pipe or a joint that's pulling apart. The gaps in those in the pipe will allow for soil to be, I guess in a sense you could say, sucked into the pipe, which creates an opportunity for a sinkhole in that pipe, or for silt to get into the into the stream, and you have silt on the downstream flow. Some cases, you can actually just fill the pipe with the soil that would be around the pipe, or the stone as well, and plug up the pipe and back up your ditch from there. The repair should be made obviously with proper couplings to ensure that you're making a good sound connection on that repair. And I also know some other things that that seem to help and prevent items such as a flap gate on the end of a pipe, rodent guards or animal guards, as well are significant ways of keeping some of the animals out of the pipe that like to sometimes build nests and pile up sticks inside the culvert or the drain tiles. On my slide here, I just highlighted a few of the different types of pipe that you're probably going to see in these ditches, or drive culverts that cross these ditches. We're all familiar with the corrugated HDPE or the high density polyethylene. See it oftentimes in a single wall or dual wall situation. And for some of these, I just threw also the ODOT reference numbers that a lot of times you'll see these specified as. So the 707.31 would be a single wall pipe. The 707.33 would be a dual wall. You oftentimes see PVC pipe in the ground as well. Typically it'll be SDR 35. Again, just ODOT number on that, 707.45. You'll see a fair amount of concrete pipe and corrugated metal pipe, especially on the larger diameter stuff. You'll see a lot of corrugated metal, especially for drive crossings quite often. So again, the ODOT numbers are referenced there as well. The slide here, I just kind of showed a couple of different types of couplings that you have available. Oftentimes this is the metal coupler. We got the coupling there for the HDPE pipe. Ferncoat coupling a lot of times can be used to transition, say, a PVC to a clay tile. I know oftentimes a lot of field tiles coming in are clay. So it's a great way to make that connection. And of course, we've got the animal guard down here in the corner. Next thing I wanted to touch on, you know, as Alex has mentioned, it's come up a couple times, the erosion control blankets. Most oftentimes we stock and carry here, again, just because it's an ODOT specification. It's a double net straw blanket. Meets an ODOT type B for their erosion control under their 712.11 specification. Got some different options on the erosion control blankets, but again, this particular one, it's 100% straw. It's got a degradable thread and it's a photodegradable netting. Again, so as that sits out in the sun, it eventually will degrade. This particular netting will give you 12 to 24 months of protection while your natives would grow in. And this particular one works best for a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 slope. Again, as you'll see here, we've got some other options. You can get into a double net straw blanket. It's a little bit more hardy, a little better option if you get a little higher flow. Again, photodegradable. You get up to 24 months of protection with that. And for some higher flow situations here, you can go in with a 100% coconut fiber type blanket. Again, this gives you a longer lasting protection. So you're looking up to 3 years protection on this. Much steeper slope, you know, 1-to-1 slope. And again, this is in use for a high flow channel as well. So much more durable. You're gonna get a lot longer life out of this in the situations that would require it. It's not that often we see this required, but once in a while it does creep up. There are some other options on the netting. They do make a biodegradable netting, which the netting is made out of jute. Again, lifespan on that though still lasts the same amount of time. Still get 12 to 24 months out of it. The only way to get a shorter lifespan, if that's something you would be hunting for on the netting, they do make the polypropylene netting. What they do is they add a UV degrader to the additive when they make that polypropylene netting. So cuts the lifespan of that down to about 90 days, which is again, you know, Alex maybe I'll speak to that a little bit more. It's a pretty short window. Of course, you get into some shelf life issues as well, in terms of how fresh it is when this stuff would make it out to a job and finally get installed and put in place. So the window on that might be a little too short. I know it's something that we've never really had to bring in for anybody, but it is something that is available if it would fit the bill. Kind of next little category I want to touch on, and sure it's something we're all very familiar with, is Sill Fence. We go through a tremendous amount of silt fence. Our big thing we carry here, we only carry an ODOT grade silt fence, which meets their specification of a type C geotextile on that under their 71209 spec. Hardwood post, 2-inch by 2-inch nominal hardwood post spaced every 10 feet. You can get these in other heights. You can get a 24-inch, you can get a 36-inch. You can pretty much get whatever you want. And once in a while we'll see these where they need to have a 6-foot post spacing in lieu of a 10-foot. Thing to be careful of on the silt fence, and we've all seen it on job sites before. You'll see silt fence falling over. You'll see the fabric all stretched out. You'll see the posts broken. You know, I guess that's one of those things where it's a buyer beware. There are definitely less expensive options out there, but if you're putting silt fence up, yeah, obviously you're putting it up for a reason. You do also have another option on silt fence. It's going to be in place for a longer time, a wire reinforced silt fence. Basically what you have is a 14 gauge wire mesh rolled you know, in behind with the geotextile as well. So these are typically put in place. They're shipped without the post. Most oftentimes a 4 or 5 foot steel T-post will be used. And again, the spacing will often be specified. We still quite frequently, even on this, we'll see them spaced 10 foot apart. And so again, with the silt fence, you know, the key with that is it must be inspected and maintained. I know often that'll be part of a SWIP plan where you know, that will need to be maintained weekly or monthly. The installation on silt fence is somewhat cumbersome. You know, the bottom 6 inches is typically trenched in place, which means that you are creating yet more soil disturbance on site, which is, I'm sure, especially not as desirable when you are along a creek or a ditch bank. And when the project is done, you know, typically you're yanking that silt fence out. Some remediation is going to be required after that to get everything put back together, reseeded, obviously, where that's come through. And then you have a big pile of silt fence to dispose of. I mean, it's not like that gets rolled up and put back on the shelf. So creates quite a mess at the end of a job, especially in some projects where you'll have 2, 3, 4, 5,000 feet of silt fence to clean up afterwards. So it creates quite a mess, but you know, obviously that's been in place and been used for many, many years. Tried and true product. Which leads me into our next kind of option to silt fence is the compost filter sock. We're really starting to see this type product take off. Typically, we're seeing this in an 8 and 12 inch diameter product. Largest sizes are available. You know, we can get them. Gosh, I think they can make them all the way up to about a 36 inch diameter. When you get into those larger diameters, they're typically the socks are actually filled in. That mulch is blown in place in the sock on site. So these come in pallets. The 8 and 12 inch do. We stock them out here in Toledo. Larger projects, obviously, we're always shipping these direct. Wood stakes are included with these. So typically in your installation, it's a much easier deal. The silt fence is simply just put in place, just laid in its position where you need it, and you come through afterwards and drive a stake in through the sock and into the soil. That's all it takes to hold it in place. Yeah, run through a couple slides here. Again, this is just an option instead of having the silt fence on a project like this, which is also sometimes an eyesore. This is much less of a visual obstacle. Doesn't look near as bad either. There are, of course, different types of sock available out there, and again, it's just like anything else. It's a buyer beware. Make sure what you're getting is a good sock. It's a solid sock. And you can see, different openings you can have polypropylene. Typically, again, these socks are photodegradable in 2 to 5 years. These never stay in place that long. These projects are usually done much longer before that. The quality of fill that goes into these socks is also critical. You can see here, depending on where you get your sock from, you'll have a lot of for lack of a better word, you'll see a lot of junk blown into these things. It's not going to be clean, fine graded mulch. It's important, that you have the proper gradation. Sock like this here, where it's just all loose, blown in, smaller fines, it's not going to do much in terms of filtering through, filtering out the dirt and the soil, so you can have your clean water coming through. Yeah, again, just a little visual on the sock. Your sediment's rolling through, traps the sediment in, and you can also get these socks with a special filler in there in case you have any sort of pollutant that you're worried about catching in these socks, especially any type of oils. They can add certain additives to it to pick up certain pollutants as well, if there's any critical area that you're worried about. Again, the other thing that's nice about the silt sock, you can lay these on a hard surface. You can lay it directly on concrete or asphalt. We've done this many times. Again, as you can see here, there's a pile of spoils. You can lay your sock right on a hard surface, and it'll do its job there just as well as it would laying in the grass. The other benefit to that is when you're not having to trench this material in to get it in place like you would silt fence, you're not digging and tearing up through tree roots and possibly killing any vegetation that way as well. So there's definitely some benefit to doing that. When you are done with the sock, typically the nice thing about it is most oftentimes you're able to come through with just a utility knife, just slit the top of the sock and allow that mulch, just dump that mulch, rake it over a little bit, and allow that mulch just to amend into the soil over time. So you don't have a big pile of junk to haul off the site. Typically at that point, all you'll have is a just a big wad of the sock to haul off instead of oftentimes a dumpster full of silt fence. So it's very beneficial as far as that goes. Again, no land disturbance. You can just see again, right? Just put it in place, stake it in, and quite simple that way. Another alternative, you can use this for slope interruption. Kind of is as you can see here on this slope. Sometimes you'll see a straw wattle used, which is another product that we also can get. The silt sock again is a little bit more hardy. It's gonna get a longer lifespan out of that. If you need a slope interruption in place for a while, it's a good way to go. Also on the side of again, spoil slopes. We often see this quite oftentimes where if it's a big enough pile and it's going to be in place for a long time, we'll typically see 2 or 3 rows of silt sock going up an embankment to slow that water coming down the slope. That's really about it. I just kind of want to touch on a few of the things that we have available for that type of material. And yeah, if you got any questions, let me know.
Eric, this is Lynette. I really liked your presentation, so thank you very much.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you, we've seen a lot of supply chain and manufacturing disruption over the past year. Have you guys experienced that with some of your products? And if so, what recommendation are you making to the industry as to, lead time for ordering?
So good question. Of course, we're seeing that that supply chain issue everywhere. It's not too horrible in terms of say Silt Fence or the Silt sock at this point. The biggest thing we're seeing there is some surcharges and upcharges because of the wood posts that are being used with these products. But that's about it. They always seem to be able to come up with, of course, the mulch fill for the sock. The Silt Fence still has been making it in. Knock on wood, we've not had any issues there. Obviously, if you drill back into the tile drain repair on the pipe side, that supply chain has been affected greatly. Whether it's HDPE, PVC, metal, that's all. We're seeing lead times on some of the stuff stretch out 8, 10, 12, 14 weeks on pipes. So, and for instance, the Fernco couplers to make the connections. The stainless steel bands on the couplers have been darn near impossible for these manufacturers, whether it's Fernco, Pipe Connects, Indiana Seal. They're all having trouble getting the bands. And I also understand that there is a massive rubber shortage looming, which probably means these materials will become even more scarce. So, so I guess short answer is we've not seen much of a delay yet. On this stuff, except the pipe. And again, the erosion control blankets have been rolling in, no problem whatsoever yet. So we're in good shape. As you get into some of that material, like the say the dandy bags or the flex storms, for your inlet protection, we're still running very solid there yet. So it's not to say I won't get an email tomorrow saying that the sky is falling there as well. But for now, we're good.
Great, thanks.
You bet.
I have a quick question. This is just something I've been curious about. This is Chris again. So like, I think they must be called dandy bags that you just mentioned, like those bags that projects are using now just at the storm drain.
Sure.
Are those, are they meant to be like removed later? Like I drive by just seeing them laying in a lot of areas still where I'm like, oh, I didn't even know there was a project there, but it already came and went. And I guess also just intuitively, they seem like something that could be reused, or is that just not common practice, I guess? But yeah, I'm just curious about the practices for those. I just see them more and more now.
Sure. Yeah, the dandy bags are a temporary measure. They are supposed to be removed when the project is done.
Okay.
Oftentimes, are they? No, not always.
They're really effective still at stopping the water.
Well, and that's part of the problem, and I know that's why Lauren in Perrysburg loves them so much. Is the problem is they can jam up, plug up, and not allow water to enter the inlet or the catch basin. So yeah, they are good and they are bad. Again, it all comes down to maintenance, just like the Silt Fence. The dandy bags are good. They serve a point and a purpose. Ultimately, there are other options. Again, refer back to Lauren Perrysburg, City of Toledo. Also, anything in their right of way, they use something called a flex storm, which is a bag that sits underneath the grate. Obviously, the bag then catches debris. Good thing about the bag is once the bag is filled, there's about a 2-inch bypass at the top of it. So if it is full, it doesn't jam up. Your water still has an ability to get out through the catch basin or manhole and make its way out. So, again, those do need to be maintained though. Pulled out, cleaned out, sucked out with a vac truck. Typically, those are a temporary means, again, of inlet protection. Should be pulled out when the project is done. Although there is a option on the flex storms, they do make those with all stainless steel framework for it and a better grade of bag that are meant to be used as a permanent means of inlet protection. but it doesn't come close to meeting any of the EPA requirements, ultimately for on a site, for long-term catchment of fines on the way out of a site long-term, but that is an option. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just call Lauren now. I'm in Perrysburg as well, so.
Yep. Yep, I know Lauren loves the dandy bags.
This is Kari. I've got a question. Eric, you've spoken about the short-term stabilization that's to be used during the construction phase. And I'm wondering, and then of course Alex talked about longer-term post-construction stabilization. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the sequencing and timing of those measures, the short-term versus long-term, and how you work together to implement those different types of stabilization.
Yeah, that's one of the magic and wonders of things that happen on a construction site, of course. I personally don't see a lot of the I guess the synergy that you probably should. I would imagine some of that might work its way through in the SWIP plan. I imagine Alex might see a little bit more of that since he works more on the consulting side of it. I know typically for me, we always seem to kind of take care of the short-term stuff. I guess it's kind of my assumption that some of the plantings and whatnot that Alex is putting in, that like he said, sometimes take a year to really develop and take hold. I'm assuming that some of my erosion control blankets are maybe working and helping protect what and maybe what Alex has put down beforehand. And maybe Alex could speak a little bit to that as well.
Yeah, I can jump in briefly. Just said again, you're talking about what you do in the short term versus long term with seeding. I mean, oftentimes we'll just focus on if there's a delay, or if we're going to wait until seed until later in the fall or next year, because sometimes you're outside of that seeding window. You might need to still use some of those annual seed blends. Get your oats and your rye in there. Maybe the erosion control blanket gets installed as well for some quick establishment, quick control. Then you might come back in later and do some plug planting or some additional seeding to have that long-term, permanent fix. So sometimes there's just a variety of different seed blends and methods you might have to use.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
And I don't see any questions in the chat box.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we can move on. Everybody has got their questions out. All right. And then I think next up on the agenda was updates from member updates. Oh, yes, member updates. So if we have any members that have any updates that they'd like to share with the group now, we're ready for them. No fun news today. All right. And so I think the next thing would be Ohio EPA update. So if Lynette has any other information she wanted to share with us.
Not really. It's really boring at Ohio EPA. No, just kidding. Stefan and I have been doing a lot more field work. It's just a season for that. And NOI applications for renewing your MS4 permit coverage were all due July 1st. I think we've seen a pretty good turnout for that. I can't think of anyone who has not on my end, but if so, we'll be notifying you shortly if something is missing, rest assured. Other than that, our central office folks are starting to turn their eye towards the renewal of the industrial multi-sector general permit, which expires in the next year. So that's what some of their focus is going to move to. I know Swanton and Lucas County, I owe you guys some stuff. Andy Stepnick, City of Toledo, I owe you an answer too. So you should be getting something from me in the next 24 hours on those topics. In Toledo, I am waiting for a little input from Shauna on your MS4 permit. I'm waiting for a little more input from our central office staff. So you'll be hearing from me next week on that.
Hey, well, that sounds good. I
Yeah.
figured it would be soon.